Hello, Hemloves. How are you? It's been a while. As you know, we are talking about Zoe Whittall's Bottle Rocket Hearts. I do apologize, my video is late. We're supposed to be on another book because it's already July. How did that happen? So as it's already been established, Bottle Rocket Hearts is there's a bug. Bottle Rocket Hearts is set in the 90s in Canada, specifically in Quebec. It's in Montreal. And Montreal is an island, which I always forget, so I think I'll just let you guys know that in case you weren't sure. And it is a very urban area. It is similar to Toronto in terms of lots of different immigrant populations. There's also a lot of businesses and there's also several universities. So it's a very urban environment, and this is where the story is set. It was published in 2007 by Cormorant Books, and I feel that's important to note just because I've been really celebrating and paying attention to Canadian publishing houses recently, and I was just on their Twitter page the other day, so I thought that was kind of cool. So a couple of the things that I wanted to touch on in today's video were the kind of coming of age story and how Eve's character, the main character, is very similar to the experience of what I would classify as the Taylor Swift kind of privileged white girl coming of age story, somebody who has lived in a fairly pampered bubble for quite a long time, where everyone she goes to school with and all the people her parents know are all fairly similar to one another, not necessarily by ethnicity, but more about the concept of, you know, we can afford the same luxuries, we can afford the same homes, we can live in this bubble where we're not having to argue with anybody really, because our politics are fairly similar, and if they're not, we're not going to talk about it. With the coming of age story, there are a lot of explorations, both sexually and politically. We pull the couch out into a bed and I climb in. I keep one hand cupped around the cordless phone. I feel suddenly apart from adolescents, like I'm a guest in their house. I'm aware with certainty at this moment that I was cared for well as a kid, that I was lucky, and I'm lucky, to know what it's like to be cared for. So like I said, Eve really reminds me of what I now identify as a kind of privileged person, and specifically a privileged female. I think there's a difference between privileged white men and privileged white girls. When she talks about having dated Della, who is the worst, by the way, but after having dated Della and realizing that she's no longer a part of that privilege anymore because she is queer, I think that there's some really beautiful passages and realizations that she comes to, because this novel or this novella is very much from her perspective, and we see how she's kind of navigating through this block of time in which she's transitioning between being a teenager and being an adult. So she's essentially a young adult, but back in the 90s I don't really think that there was that kind of understanding or that term for that age period when you're 19, so you can do everything. You can vote, you can participate in pornography, and you can go to war, and you've been driving and smoking and whatever, drinking. Drinking, that's the new one. I really loved when she said, it was after that I just deduced that I was attracted to girly boys and boyish girls, or girls who later became boys. Boys were always going to be a part of the equation. That just seems to really ring true of her privilege and her position and the way that she was raised and the things that she did as a teenager with her friend Jenny, and the ways that they were taught to kind of navigate the world. It was almost as if you weren't supposed to navigate the world, and therefore you couldn't position yourself in it. You just had to kind of watch from the outside, from the outskirts, and conform, which is kind of an overused term for this time in someone's life, but conform to the ways in which they had been brought up, because for young girls that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to be brought up. Somebody else is supposed to shepherd you into adulthood, and then you're supposed to get married, I guess. Normally I'm against nudity. I like to make out clothed, turn off the lights, proceed veiled and shadowed. Nudity is too much of an answer for me. leaving nothing left to discuss or ponder, visualize. If someone takes their clothes off too fast, I usually start thinking about running some errands. I think this really speaks to that idea of being brought up and someone having to almost intrigue her enough into being involved in what's happening to the changes within her and the changes around her. The fact that this book is set during the referendum, which is a very tumultuous time in Canadian and especially Quebec history, and I didn't live in Quebec ever, and knowing that that was happening when I was young, I felt very much an outsider to what was going on. And I think there are people in this book like Della who think that it was just theirs. It was their experience and no one else had to deal with how much of a struggle it was to be a francophone or to be against the Anglos. And for someone who is English speaking, like Eve, I think she is once again on the outside or positioned on the outside of what it's like to be existing in a politically charged space like Montreal. I think by the time she admits to wanting to be a part of this queer community, she's already met Della, and Della is kind of her shepherd into that community. And the way that as she grows up and breaks up temporarily from Della, she finds out what people have called her behind her back or not so secretly, and it's something like Della's baby cutie or baby hottie or something, and she's just this accessory. And it's when she's apart from Della and doesn't have that same relationship with someone who's navigating her path for her, that's when she kind of realizes who she's been leading up until that point. And that's when she starts to really bond or try and bond with people like Rachel and people like Seven, who again she's kind of on the outside of. I thought it was a really beautiful sentiment and very sad. And at the time, you don't know what's going to happen with these people and their relationships. When she said, I knew at this moment that my friendship with Rachel was circumstantial, that just like Melanie at the health food store, we'd be thrown together for a concentrated number of hours, and when we moved apart, quit or got fired, we wouldn't really have coffee like we planned to when we run into each other at the drugstore and scrawl numbers on the backs of our hands. Especially after you've experienced what it's like to be 19 to, say, 24, once you've finished university or college and you've had those very young but very adult experiences, you realize that there are a lot of people in your life that you've met that you're never going to see again. And when you do, it's not going to be this beautiful bonded relationship, and you're not going to have anything to connect with them later. It's very circumstantial, and they're people that might shape you at the time, and you might even think of later, but they don't serve a purpose in your life after that. Some of my favorite moments about Eve were the fact that she was willing to be politically involved even when Della wasn't there. I feel like at that point she had met enough people to feel safe enough to be adventurous, which is actually not safe at all. And it was just such a cool experience to watch her character grow in such an exciting time. It's so exciting to be a person who is on the cusp of adulthood. Instead of feeling scared, I got bold. I made out with girls on the streets. I held Melanie's hand just to be visible. I wore Queer Nation and ACT UP t-shirts I'd borrowed from Della months before. I scrawled "Everybody is HIV positive" across t-shirts my mother had ordered from the Sears catalog. I tasted pepper on my tongue before I got raging headaches and thought of Rachel every day. I stopped going home to visit my family, not able to handle the suburbs, risk seeing skinheads while on my way to the corner store to buy my mother milk. Something was bubbling under my skin, and I couldn't understand it. It was rage. The whole passage is probably my favorite part of the book because she is internally coming to terms with how she feels about all of the changes in her life, but also that she is at peace with the fact that she can feel something. She's not on the outskirts anymore. She has been initiated into communities and relationships that submerge her in living. Whereas before, she was just this young privileged girl that didn't need to be submersed in any sort of living because she wasn't really supposed to be there. I remember when the referendum happened, talking to my family because I was literally a kid, and you know, I was just like, why would you want to leave? I wasn't asking that because I was a kid. I was asking that because we don't understand what it's like to live there. And it's just such a different landscape for the Quebecois. My family, who were adults at the time, didn't understand any better than I did how they were going to manage it, and if the vote passed, you know, what would happen. It was going to affect everybody, but they didn't have a say. And so even though you aren't there, it's not just hot gossip. It will affect all of Canada if Quebec ever separates. And the fact that it was so close 20 years ago, ugh. I always think of the 90s as 10 years ago, so that was weird. It will always affect Canada. It won't just affect Quebec and Quebecers and the people in Montreal. So as I said, I really loved this book. Zoe Whittall is the bomb, and I'm so grateful for Ronnie for picking this book and for also participating. So like I said, be sure to watch her video and watch Jason's video, and I hope you liked this video. I hope it wasn't too rambly. I'm out of practice, but I thank you for spending your time here and listening to what we had to say about this beautiful, beautiful book. Thanks for watching. Bye.